in the interrogation room was suffocating, broken only by the faint, frantic drumming of Lola's heart against her ribs. Jon's sudden, raw display of violence had shocked her, but it had also revealed the fierce, protective core of his loyalty. Now the danger was distilled into the quiet standoff between the betrayed and the betrayer. Jon didn't move. He simply stood over Jinho, his expression a mask of cold fury, his eyes promising a depth of retribution Jinho clearly understood. "You have served the Han family since you were 16, Jon said, his voice regaining its dangerous quietness. "You taught me how to drive. You covered my mistakes in Seoul. You were the only one I ever trusted without reservation. Tell me why you handed me to them." Jinho spat a curse, the defiance flickering back to life. "Because your blood is weak, Jon. Your father is blind with sentiment. The Sons of the Serpent offered clarity and power. They offered me a chance to stop bowing to a boy who plays at being a gangster while reading philosophy books." "Philosophy books didn't save you, Jinho," Jon countered, the cruelty in his voice calculated. He glanced at the wrist cuff attaching Jinho to the table. "Your loyalty was paid for with 30 pieces of silver. You didn't become a leader, you became a pawn." Jon straightened fully, moving away from the table, pacing the short distance to the door and back. He turned to Lola, his back to Jinho, effectively cutting the traitor out of the conversation. "Lola," Jon said, his voice suddenly soft, almost conversational. "Remember what I told you about the Serpent faction? Their leaders, the elders, are obsessed with control. They value information, but they value silence more. Any failure, any capture, means complete liability." Jinho watched the interaction, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Jon returned to the table, leaning in close to Jinho again, his eyes gleaming with a terrible realization. "When my father takes a traitor, he doesn't just kill them. He sends a message. Minjae's team took you an hour outside of San Francisco. They brought you here, to a non-syndicate-owned facility for a clean extraction of information. But if you don't talk, Jinho, the Don is not going to send you back to Seoul. He's going to release you right here, on American soil." Jinho's burlolato finally cracked. His face went ashen, the color draining from his cheeks. "Release me," Jinho whispered, the word laced with pure, unadulterated terror. "Yes," Jon confirmed, a dark satisfaction curling his lip. "They already know you failed. You tried to kill me and you were caught. You are now a liability to them. They will hunt you, Jinho. They will hunt you slowly in the shadows until they find you and make an example of you. You will be disposable. But if you tell me what I need to know, I can give you sanctuary under the Han name. Not freedom, but life." The choice was stark. Death at the hands of the serpents he had joined, or a bleak, protected existence under the rule of the family he had betrayed. Jinho swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the small room, his gaze finally settling on the sterile, unforgiving steel door. The defiance was extinguished, replaced by the desperate, clinging instinct for survival. He dropped his gaze, his voice barely audible. "They have an operations center in the States. 2 blocks from your university, a restaurant. They meet there. The leader is known only as the Elder." Jon looked over Jinho's bowed head to the observation window, nodding to Minjae, who was standing on the other side. The information was enough. He turned, taking Lola's hand and pulling her toward the door. The moment of confrontation was over. Outside the interrogation room, the contrast was immediate. The air was less charged, the guards relaxed slightly. Jon was focused, already giving rapid, precise orders to Minjae in low, intense Korean. Lola stood silently, watching him. the man who had held her with such desperation now coldly commanding his resources. Minja turned to her, his expression unusually gentle. "You were very brave in there, Miss Brooks." "I was terrified," Lola admitted honestly, her voice trembling slightly. Jon finished his briefing and came to her, his harshness dissolving immediately. He brought her hands up to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "He gave us the location," Jon said. "A restaurant 2 blocks from campus. It's a hidden base of operations. The elder is likely there." Lola felt a chill despite the warmth of his touch. 2 blocks away? They were right there, all this time. "They hide in plain sight," Jon confirmed grimly. "They used my routine, my campus, as their staging ground. That ends tonight." He looked at Minjae. "Prep the extraction team. We hit the location in 2 hours." Lola looked up at the fierce determination in his eyes. "I'm going with you." Jon shook his head instantly. "Absolutely not, Lola. This is not a library basement. This is a raid. It will be violent." She placed her hand on his cheek, forcing him to meet her gaze. "I know where that restaurant is, Jon. I've walked past it hundreds of times. You need intel on the area, on the entrances and exits. I can give you details your surveillance team won't see on a map. I can point out the places where a fast escape is possible, where a blind spot exists. Don't leave me behind when I'm useful." Jon looked at her, his love for her wrestling with his need to protect her. The risk was enormous, but her knowledge of the surrounding blocks, the Dijon Ferry entrances, the parking garage access, the alleyways she used as shortcuts, was indeed invaluable. He looked at Minji, who gave a minute grudging nod. Jon pulled her tight against his chest, a desperate final hug. "If anything goes wrong, you follow Minji's direct order. You hear me? No hesitation." "I hear you," she promised, gripping him tight. The next 2 hours were a blur of intense planning. Lola sketched out the side streets, described the height of the walls, and identified the restaurant's least used service door. As the clock ticked down to the raid, Jon dressed in a bulletproof vest worn under a heavy black jacket. Lola changed too, pulling on black jeans, her darkest sweatshirt, and lacing up her most comfortable running shoes. The war was no longer in the shadows. It was moving onto her streets. The air in the secure facility crackled with focused energy. The 2 hours allotted for preparation melted away under the intensity of the briefing. Jon's team, Minjae and 8 other men, all hardened professionals, moved with the silent efficiency of a highly trained unit. Every man wore black, their faces grim, their movements precise. Lola, though armed only with her street knowledge, felt the adrenaline sharpen her senses. She finished tracing the path of a seldom-used utility alley onto a printed map of the campus area, highlighting the precise location of the restaurant, a high-end discreet Korean fusion spot called the Silver Bell, and the low brick wall near its dumpster enclosure. "The loading area here," Lola pointed, her finger steady. "It's used only for deliveries before 6 a.m. The door is steel, but it leads directly to the kitchen, and it's a blind spot for the street cameras on University Avenue." Jon looked at the marked spot, then at Minjae. "Minjae, you and Team 3 take that entry point. It's our fastest path to the interior without breaching the main dining room." Minjae nodded once, adjusting the communications wire running into his earpiece. Jon turned to Lola, his dark eyes intense, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. He placed a hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. "You stay with me and Team 1. You ride in the armored van, and you do not leave the vehicle unless I give the direct order. Minjae will have eyes on your position the entire time." "I understand the rules," Lola whispered, meeting his gaze. She saw the fear for her safety warring with the grim necessity of the mission. He pulled her into one last, desperate embrace, crushing her against the solid bulk of his protective vest. "Stay alive, Lola. That is your only mission." "Same for you, Jon. She murmured into his jacket, inhaling the last scent of his normal self before he fully became the soldier. At 1:45 a.m., the street was dead silent, illuminated only by the cold sodium glow of the streetlights. The 3 black SUVs and a discreet unmarked armored van carrying Jon, Lola, and the main breach team parked several blocks away from the Silver Bell, blending easily into the quiet Oakland neighborhood. Lola was wedged in the back of the van, the reinforced interior claustrophobic and echoing with the soft clicks of weapons being checked. She focused on her breathing, matching the rhythm of the city's distant, low hum. Jon was a silhouette of readiness beside her. Minjae's voice came through the comms. Team 2 is positioned. Utility alley confirmed clear. Jon took a deep breath. Go time. He opened the van door, just a crack. The cold, damp air of the city night rushed in, smelling of diesel, wet asphalt, and the sharp scent of tension. Jon and his team melted into the shadows, moving with a predatory quiet toward the target. Lola watched the grainy surveillance feed on the small monitor in the back of the van. Her eyes were fixed on the thermal image of the restaurant, where unexpected hot spots indicated people were still awake and moving inside. Team 1 is at the front entrance. Jon's voice was a low, disciplined rasp in her earpiece. Minji, go. A moment of profound, terrible silence stretched. Then the world exploded. Crash. Minjae's team breached the steel Dijonvari door. Almost instantly, the heavy silence of the night was replaced by the deafening percussion of automatic gunfire. On the screen, Lola saw bodies, thermal silhouettes, scrambling inside the building. The sound of shouting in quick, sharp Korean was frantic, overlaid by the metallic echo of the fighting. We're in! Heavy resistance in the kitchen, not just chefs. They were waiting, Minjae barked over the comms. Jon didn't hesitate. Breach front door, hard and fast. The front glass of the Silver Bell shattered violently. Jon and his team poured in, moving toward the deep interior of the restaurant. The battle intensified, the sound filtering back to the van, a chaotic symphony of life and death. Lola huddled in the back, her fingers digging into the metal seat frame. She was outside the fray, yet utterly consumed by it. She could hear Jon's commands, sharp and unwavering, directing the flow of the attack. Clear! Second floor clear. We have him! Found the elder, but he's resisting. TEAM. Suddenly, the noise level dropped. The firing became sporadic, then ceased entirely. A heavy, chilling silence fell over the comms channel. Then Minji's voice cut through, tight with alarm. Jon, backup needed at the back exit. We have a runner with the elder's laptop, heading into the utility alley. He's heading right toward the dumpster enclosure. Lola's eyes flew to the map burned into her memory. The dumpster enclosure. The runner was heading for the low brick wall she had specifically identified as a potential escape route to the next street over. She didn't wait for Jon's order, or even his permission. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, driven by instinct and the knowledge that the runner could take crucial information about the entire Serpent operation with him. She flung the heavy rear door of the van open, ignoring the alarmed shout of the driver. I know that alley. I'm going for the cutoff, she yelled into the night, bolting before the van driver could stop her. Lola ran, fueled by pure, desperate adrenaline, her running shoes silent on the wet pavement. She cut through the shadowed lot of a closed hardware store, her path exactly the shortcut she had sketched out just hours ago. She could hear the heavy, pounding footsteps of the fleeing man ahead, magnified by the close walls of the alley. She reached the utility alley just as the runner, a tall, panicked figure in a suit clutching a sleek silver laptop, reached the low brick wall she had identified. He was about to vault over it when he heard her. He turned, startled, his eyes wide. He looked at her, a slight, panting woman in black jeans, and sneered, dismissing her instantly. But Lola wasn't trying to fight him. She was buying time. "Stop!" she screamed, a sound of pure terror and conviction, throwing herself against the man's legs just as he tried to jump. He stumbled, falling hard. The runner let out a yell of pain, and the silver laptop flew from his grasp, skittering across the grimy pavement and cracking against the base of the brick wall. Lola scrambled back, heart pounding. The man was furious, scrambling to his feet, ignoring the laptop to focus on his unexpected assailant. Before he could take a step toward her, the alley entrance erupted. Jon appeared, moving like a phantom, followed closely by Minji. They saw Lola, dangerously exposed, saw the downed runner, and saw the smashed laptop. Jon didn't say a word. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying Aryanef and blinding fury. Minji was instantly on the runner, subduing him with brutal, quick efficiency. Jon ran straight to Lola, grabbing her shoulders, his voice raw with a barely contained tremor. "What did you do? I told you to stay in the van." "The laptop, he was getting away. It's broken, but it's here," she managed, pointing a shaky finger at the gleaming piece of metal lying near the wall. He looked from the shattered laptop to the secured runner and finally back to Lola, his anger instantly dissolving into overwhelming, protective love. He yanked her against his chest, holding her tighter than he ever had before. "You're insane, Lola," he whispered against her hair, his heart hammering against hers. "You're crazy, reckless, and you nearly gave me a heart attack, but you saved the mission." Minjae, still holding the struggling runner, looked at the damaged laptop and then at Lola. For the first time, his granite face softened into something resembling grudging respect. "Retrieve the laptop," he commanded his team, then looked directly at Lola. "Your knowledge of these streets is formidable, Miss Brooks." The war wasn't over, but the tides had turned, and Lola, the librarian, had just secured the key to the Sons of the Serpent's American operation. The alley was secured, the runner subdued, and the damaged laptop carefully retrieved by Minji's team. Jon held Lola tightly as the last remnants of adrenaline coursed through her, then gently guided her back to the armored van. The mission had been a success, but the cost for Jon had nearly been too high. Back at the secure facility, the damaged laptop lay on a workbench, surrounded by grim-faced tech specialists. Minji personally oversaw the recovery efforts. The outer casing was cracked, the screen spider-webbed, but the internal drive was intact. Jon stood beside Lola, his arm a reassuring weight around her shoulders, as they watched the technicians work. The air in the command center was tense, thick with anticipation. How long until they can access the data? Lola whispered, her voice still a little shaky. "It depends on their encryption," Jon replied, his voice low. "But my father's tech team is the best in Asia. They'll get in." Hours bled into the pre-dawn. Coffee cups accumulated. Jon never left her side, his gaze constantly sweeping the room, his hand never far from hers. The intimate scene of him almost losing her in the alley had deepened their bond, stripping away any remaining pretense of boundaries. They were a unit, forged in fire. Finally, a young technician let out a shout of triumph. "We're in! Importing data now!" The main screen in the command center flickered to life, displaying a deluge of files, spreadsheets, and encrypted messages. Minjae immediately began barking orders in Korean, assigning tasks, highlighting key sections. "What is it?" Lola asked, her eyes scanning the foreign script. Jon's face was grim, his jaw tight. "It's their entire American cell. Names, locations, communication protocols, and..." He zoomed in on a particular file, his expression hardening. "A direct link. The leader of the Sons of the Serpent's American operation, the Elder, reports directly to Kang Dae-jung." Lola felt a chill run down her spine. "Who is Kang Dae-jung?" "He's the true power behind the Serpents," Jon explained, his voice laced with venom. "A Seoul faction elder. He was one of the men my father deposed years ago. Hebe Geneve's the Han Syndicate has grown soft, too westernized. He wants to bring back the old ways, and he wants my father's head." The connection was clear, chillingly so. The war wasn't just a localized skirmish, it was a global power play, orchestrated from the very heart of the Korean underworld. Her streets, her university, had merely been a battlefield in a much larger conflict. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and soft purple, the command center was still a hive of activity. The recovered data was being uploaded, analyzed, and cross-referenced with intelligence from Seoul. The information would cripple Kang Dae-jung's American operations, buying the Han Syndicate valuable time. Jon led Lola to a small private lounge attached to the facility, a quiet space with plush sofas and a hidden kitchen. He brewed them both fresh tea, the steam rising in the quiet room. He had barely slept, but his focus was unwavering. He sat beside her on the sofa, pulling her close. The city outside was waking up, but in here, in the aftermath of their harrowing night, it felt like a fragile, intimate cocoon. Lola leaned her head against his shoulder, Jon the solid beat of his heart. "It feels like a lifetime ago that I was just checking books at the library." Jon chuckled softly, his hand stroking her hair. "You are a force of nature, Lola Brooks. You charged into an alley after an armed man. I have never seen such courage." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but sincere. I knew where he was going. And I knew you needed that laptop. I couldn't let him get away." He kissed her then, a long, deep kiss that was full of the night's terror and the morning's profound arjonef. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a silent promise of everything they had become to each other. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, then firm with conviction, tasting of tea and the faint metallic tang of the night's violence. Lola responded with equal intensity, pouring all her fear and fierce devotion into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Jon's eyes were serious. "You're really in this now, Lola, deeper than I ever wanted you to be." "I know," she replied, her voice steady, "and I'm not leaving. We said we face it together." He smiled, a genuine, rare curve of his lips. "Then we face it together, and since you're going to be around my family, it's time you start learning some Korean. It will keep you safer, help you understand." Lola's eyebrows rose. "You're going to teach me?" "Yes," he said, his gaze softening. "Starting now, the first word you need to know." He took her hand, tracing the characters on her palm. "Sarangi, Sarangi, it means I love you." Lola's heart swelled. Lola's heart swelled. The vulnerability of the word whispered in the quiet dawn was more powerful than any weapon. "Sarangi," she repeated, her voice soft, trying out the foreign syllables. Jon leaned in and kissed her again, a gentle, tender caress. "Good. Now, the next word you need to know is danger, and then run." Lola laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound that finally released the tension of the night. "Somehow, I think I already know those." Over the next few weeks, the routine in their secured apartment shifted. Jon, now fully recovered, became a central figure in the Han Syndicate's counteroffensive. The data from the laptop had indeed crippled the Sons of the Serpent's American operations, allowing Jon's team to dismantle several key cells. But the intelligence also revealed the depth of Kang Dae-jung's influence, reaching far beyond Seoul. Lola diligently continued her classes, but her free time was spent poring over Korean textbooks Jon provided. He patiently taught her basic phrases, pronunciation, and the cultural nuances of his world. Their lessons were often punctuated by his rapid-fire phone calls in Korean, forcing Lola to pay attention to intonation and context, picking up fragments of intelligence on the fly. One evening, as Jon drilled her on the difference between Anyong and Anyonghaseyo, a secure call came through from Seoul. Jon answered, his face instantly hardening. He listened, his responses clipped, sharp. When he hung up, his eyes were cold steel. Kang Dae-jung, Jon said, his voice quiet, dangerous. He knows his American operation has been compromised. He also knows who did it. Lola's breath hitched. Jin-ho? No, Jon corrected. He deduced it was me, and that you were involved. He has initiated a full-scale retaliation. He's calling on his old allies, activating sleeper cells across Asia and here. He has declared open war on my father's syndicate. The words hung heavy in the air, echoing the threat from the dawn. The quiet before the storm was over. The storm had arrived. Jon walked to the panoramic window, staring out at the vibrant, unsuspecting city. My father is mobilizing. We have to go to Seoul. Lola didn't hesitate. She walked to him, taking his hand. Then we go to Seoul, she confirmed, her voice firm. Her Korean was still elementary, but her resolve was absolute. We face it together. Jon turned, his eyes searching hers, recognizing the unwavering commitment. He pulled her into a tight embrace, a silent promise against the coming tempest. The declaration of open war by Kang Dae-jung, broadcast through the cold clarity of a secure line, ripped the last vestiges of normalcy from Jon and Lola's lives. There was no time for sentiment, only action. Within 12 hours of the call, the secure facility was shut down. Lola packed a single expensive duffel bag, a gift from Jon, a stark contrast to the threadbare backpacks of her past. Her college ID and library card felt like our jaunts from a forgotten life. Jon moved through the preparation process with chilling focus. He coordinated the final cleanup of the Sons of the Serpent's American network, leaving nothing but confusion for the remaining hostile elements. At dusk, they were driven to a small private airfield outside the city. The jet waiting for them was sleek, black, and utterly silent, a long-range executive Gulfstream, registered under a shell corporation. The cabin was luxurious, a startling mix of opulence and high-tech security. As they boarded, Min-jae, who would be joining them, handed Lola a small, flat box. "For your protection, Miss Brooks," he stated, his usual impassivity slightly thawed. Inside lay a thin, bespoke bulletproof vest, tailored to be worn discreetly beneath her clothing. It was another stark reminder. She wasn't going on a vacation. She was entering a fortified war zone. Once airborne, soaring high over the Pacific, the realization of the journey hit Lola with full force. She was leaving everything she knew, her identity, her history, even the familiar geography of her struggle, for a city and a culture where she was entirely alien, following a man who was fighting a war for his very inheritance. Jon found her staring out the window, watching the curvature of the earth against the limitless black sky. "Scared?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. "Terrified," she admitted, placing her hand over the hidden vest. "But mostly because I'm going to a country where I can only say sarange and annyeonghaseyo." Jon smiled, reaching for her hand. "We fixed that now. No time like a 15-hour flight for immersion." He pulled out a new tablet loaded with Korean learning applications and cultural guides. He spent hours with her, not just on grammar, but on context, explaining the rigid rules of address, the importance of bowing, and the weight of honor within the syndicate's framework. "In Seoul, you are not just Lola Brooks, the student," Jon explained, drawing a diagram of family hierarchy on a napkin. "You are my partner. That means respect from our men, but also extreme scrutiny from our enemies. You must understand the signals." He taught her phrases related to security. "Dowaju seo, help me," "Gwen Shana, I'm okay," and "Jogi, danger look out." It was a chilling curriculum, blending romance with survival. They landed at Incheon International Airport, ICN, in the pre-dawn hours. The city of Seoul stretched out before them, a dazzling, overwhelming panorama of concrete, glass, and neon. It felt impossibly vast, modern, and ancient, all at once. The moment they stepped off the private jet, the security detail multiplied. A motorcade of identical, armored black Genesis SUVs was waiting. The transition was immediate and total. They were swallowed by the Han Syndicate's world. Their journey from the airport was a high-speed, military-grade maneuver through silent, wide highways. Lola watched the iconic skyline, Namsan Tower, the towering commercial districts, flash past. They were not headed for a modern residence. The Don insisted on tradition during wartime. The motorcade pulled up to a massive walled compound in an older, prestigious district, surprisingly close to the city's historical heart. The compound was traditional Korean architecture, built around a series of courtyards, guarded by imposing stone walls and heavy gates. "This is the safe house," Lola whispered, awestruck. "This is the main compound," Jon corrected, his voice hardening slightly. "It's been in our family for 3 generations. It's built to withstand a siege." They were ushered inside immediately. The interior was a fusion of minimalist modernism and profound old-world elegance. Silence ruled. The guards wore traditional suits, but moved with the same lethal efficiency as Minji's American team. Jon led Lola through several winding corridors to a spacious, private suite overlooking a beautifully manicured enclosed garden. "You will not leave this suite without an escort," Jon instructed, his tone suddenly formal. "This is not America, Lola. The serpents are everywhere here. They know every face, every name, every weakness." Lola nodded, her fear tempered by resolve. "I understand. What about your father?" Jon hesitated, running a tired hand through his hair. "I go to him now. We begin coordinating the counterattack. The Elder's laptop gave us a tactical advantage, but Kang Dae-jung is already moving his pieces." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her fiercely, a desperate anchor in the unfamiliar room. "Stay here. Rest. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Minjae. I will be back before the end of the day. Saranghae." "I love you," Lola returned in English, her hands clinging to the lapels of his suit jacket. As the heavy, carved wooden door closed behind Jon, the silence of the suite descended. Lola walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the ancient, beautiful, and utterly hostile city of Seoul, Fajeong, the full weight of the danger they were now in. She was behind the strongest walls in the syndicate, yet she had never felt more exposed. The vast, opulent suite, with its polished dark wood and minimalist design, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage after Jon left. Lola walked to the window, watching the compound's intricate network of courtyards, guarded paths, and hidden security cameras. The high walls blocked the modern Seoul skyline, creating a temporal bubble, a place where ancient power reigned. She tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. The jet lag, the adrenaline, and the overwhelming unfamiliarity of her surroundings kept her mind racing. She unpacked, laying out her few belongings in the massive, sparse closet. The bulletproof vest felt like a second skin she was now destined to wear. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting sunlight on the garden below. Jon hadn't returned. The silence of the suite, once a comfort, now felt oppressive, amplifying her isolation. She rehearsed the Korean phrases Jon had taught her, but the words felt hollow without him. Just as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the compound, a soft, insistent knock came at her door. Lola froze. "Do not open the door for anyone but me or Minjae." Jon's words echoed in her mind. Min-jae, she called out, her voice a little too sharp. A woman's voice, calm and clear, replied in perfectly accented English. No, Miss Brooks. It is Kim Ji-hai. I am here on Don Han's orders. He requests your presence. Please open the door. Lola hesitated. She didn't know a Kim Ji-hai. But the mention of the Don carried an undeniable weight of authority. Her curiosity and a deep-seated desire to understand the world Jon belonged to warred with her caution. Taking a deep breath, Lola slowly unlatched the heavy door. Standing outside was a woman in her late 40s, dressed in a traditional, elegant hanbok of deep sapphire silk. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, refined bun, and her expression was utterly impassive, her eyes dark and intelligent. Behind her stood two silent guards, their faces like stone. Miss Brooks, Kim Ji-hai said, bowing slightly. Don Han requires your presence. You will come with me. Lola looked into the woman's unreadable eyes. There was no room for argument. All right, she said, stepping out. Kim Ji-hai led Lola through a bewildering labyrinth of corridors and courtyards. The compound was far larger than Lola had imagined, a complex ecosystem of rooms, training grounds, and secure communication centers. They passed men and women moving with silent purpose, guards, staff, strategists. Every face was solemn, every movement dejanberate. The atmosphere was one of quiet, intense preparation for war. Finally, they reached a pair of massive lacquered wooden doors guarded by two particularly imposing men. Kim Ji-hai spoke a few words in Korean, and the doors swung inward. The room was vast, an incredible blend of ancient power and modern technology. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking a serene, meticulously raked Zen garden. The opposite wall was a multi-screen display, flickering with live feeds from across Seoul and complex strategic maps of Asia. And in the center of it all, seated at a low, dark wood table, was Han Ji-soo, the Don. He sat with the quiet authority of a king on his throne, dressed in a traditional silk robe, yet his gaze was as sharp and modern as the glowing screens. Jon was seated opposite him, looking intense and focused, briefing his father with a map spread between them. Min-jae stood respectfully to the side. The moment Lola entered, Jon looked up, a flicker of surprise, and then warning in his eyes. The Don, however, did not acknowledge her presence directly. Kim Ji-hee led Lola to a cushioned seat to the side, slightly behind Jon. You will observe and remain silent unless addressed, she instructed softly. Lola nodded, her heart pounding. She was witnessing the syndicate's nerve center, the engine of its power. Jon continued his briefing, detailing the neutralized American cells. The elder is still at large, Appa, but his network is fragmented. Don Han listened, his fingers tracing patterns on the map. Kang Dai-jung will not be deterred by a few severed limbs. He will come for the head. He glanced at Jon, his expression grim. He intends to make a statement. Seoul will burn. Suddenly, one of the screens on the wall flickered, showing a live news report. A famous commercial skyscraper in the heart of Seoul was engulfed in flames, smoke billowing into the twilight sky. This is a direct hit, Appa, Jon said, his voice tight. A distraction to pull our resources thin. As the screens buzzed with new intelligence feeds, the room became a maelstrom of activity. Strategists moved over maps, communicating in rapid Korean. Jon and Min-jae were pulled into the urgent discussions. Lola watched, feijoning the immense weight of the conflict. This was not just a family feud. It was a battle for control that would inevitably spill into the lives of ordinary citizens. Then, a sudden, frantic shout from one of the tech specialists at the control panel. Appa, Jon, incoming intel from an old source. Kang Dae-jung is initiating a secondary attack. Not a distraction, a targeted strike. The specialist furiously typed on his keyboard, pulling up a map. A blinking red dot appeared, pinpointing a location on the compound's very edge. Near the rarely used North Gate, John's eyes widened in alarm. The North Gate? That's where the old archives are kept, and the family's ceremonial weapons. A symbolic target. Don Han's face hardened, his eyes blazing with cold fury. He dares to touch our ancestors' legacy. He rose slowly, every movement radiating immense, terrifying power. Jon, Min-jae, secure the North Gate. Do not let them breach the outer wall. As Jon and Min-jae scrambled, grabbing weapons from a nearby rack, the room descended into controlled chaos. Lola watched, her mind racing. The North Gate was distant from her suite, but close enough to shake the very foundations of the compound if breached. Jon paused at the door, turning back to Lola, his face a mix of fierce protection and desperate love. Stay here, Lola, with my father. Do you understand? Do not move. Lola nodded, her voice caught in her throat. She understood. He was going to defend his legacy, and she was left in the very heart of it. The command center was instantly transformed from a strategic hub into a defensive fortress. As Jon and Min-jae, now cloaked in ballistic vests and carrying suppressed assault rifles, vanished through the heavy doors, the tension became a palpable weight. Don Han remained seated at the low table, radiating an unnerving stillness despite the chaos erupting around him. Kim Ji-hae moved swiftly to the communications panels, issuing clipped urgent orders in Korean to the compound's internal security teams. Lola was trapped in the sanctum, the sounds of the distant attack slowly filtering in. First, a muffled thud, likely a distraction explosion at the gate, followed by the distinct, sharp, staccato sound of automatic weapons fire, echoing eerily off the high perimeter walls. The large screen monitoring the North Gate flickered. It showed a chaotic, night vision feed, black-clad figures attempting to scale the ancient stone wall, ropes whipping, and Han's syndicate guards, moving with surprising speed and agility, engaging them in fierce close-quarters combat. Don Han watched the screen without blinking. He didn't acknowledge Lola, yet his presence was her only security. Lola gripped the silk fabric of her cushion, forcing herself to breathe. She tried to decipher the frantic Korean being spoken, picking out fragments of the survival phrases Jon had taught her. Jogi, danger. Gwenchana, I'm okay. Then a sudden, desperate cry came over the comm system. Secondary breach. They're through the maintenance tunnel, near the archives. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Kim Ji-hae gasped, her elegant composure briefly cracking. The Don's gaze snapped from the monitor to the door. The archives were just beyond the inner defense line, containing not just historical documents, but sensitive ledgers and the ancestral weapons Jon had mentioned. This was a critical failure. A strategist near the control panel shouted, "They're inside the inner courtyard. 2 hostiles, heading towards the West Wing." The West Wing led directly to the historical archives, and terrifyingly, it was the shortest route back toward the secluded area containing Lola's suite. Don Han finally turned, his eyes piercing through Lola, assessing her not as a guest but as a liability. "Kim Ji-hae," the Don commanded, his voice a low, cold rumble. "Escort Miss Brooks to the Bunker 7 relay point. Immediately. Do not delay." "Appa, no!" Jon's voice suddenly roared through the comms system, strained and frantic. "They are flanking us at the north wall. They are too many. Lola, listen to me. Do not leave that room until I am with you." The Don ignored his son's desperate plea. "Go, Ji-hee, now." Kim Ji-hee grabbed Lola's arm with surprising strength, her face etched with urgency. "Come, Miss Brooks, we must move." Lola was pulled from the room, thrust back into the labyrinthine corridors. The silence was gone. They moved quickly, passing guards who were running in the opposite direction, their weapons drawn. The distinct smell of gunpowder was now sharp in the air. As they turned a corner near a beautifully carved wooden screen, the air was ripped apart by a sound that made Lola's blood run cold, the close, echoing report of a silenced pistol. Kim Ji-hee shoved Lola violently against the wall, shielding her body just as a figure rounded the corner ahead. One of Kang Dae-jung's men, clad in tactical black, his face covered by a mask, a pistol still raised. The man hadn't seen them. He was focused on advancing toward the command center. Kim Ji-hye acted with startling speed. She reached into the folds of her traditional dress, not for a gun, but for a short, polished ceremonial dagger, a argent more dangerous than any modern weapon in her hands. "Run! The East Corridor!" Kim Ji-hye hissed in sharp, perfect English. Before Lola could move, Kim Ji-hye lunged, a swift, elegant blur of silk and motion. She engaged the serpent operative in a silent, deadly ballet, the man's pistol discharging uselessly as she closed the distance. Lola didn't hesitate. She ran, her legs pumping, following Kim Ji-hye's last command. She sprinted down the long, unfamiliar corridor, her mind flashing back to the map she and Jon had studied, desperately trying to orient herself. East Corridor. Bunker 7. She heard a final, muffled grunt behind her, followed by the clatter of the dagger hitting the stone floor. She didn't look back. She pushed through a swinging wooden door, emerging into a narrow, stone-paved inner courtyard used for drying laundry. Ahead, she saw a heavy, disguised door, Bunker 7. But standing right next to it, facing away from her, was another serpent operative, talking urgently into a radio, undoubtedly coordinating the next wave of the attack. Lola, the African-American student who specialized in literature, had a choice: scream and draw the attention of the armed operative, or use the silence to survive. Her eyes fell on a thick, wet canvas laundry sack full of linens resting against the wall. Taking a deep, desperate breath, Lola crept forward. She lifted the heavy, damp sack with both hands, using all her strength, and hurled it with a grunt of effort. The wet, heavy sack hit the operative squarely in the back of the head. The man went down with a surprised, choked cry, his radio clattering away. He was stunned, but not out. Lola didn't wait. She ran to the bunker door, frantically searching for the mechanism Kim Ji-hye must have taught her, a keypad discreetly disguised as part of the wall carving. Just as the operative was beginning to stir and lift his head, Lola found the hidden button, the panel lighting up. She frantically punched in the code she guessed was standard protocol, 4 zeros, just as the man's gaze locked onto her. The heavy steel door slid open with a metallic hiss. Lola plunged inside, slamming the button to seal the door just as the operative's hand slapped against the metal. The sound of his frustrated roar was cut off by the thick, unforgiving steel. She was in the darkness, heart hammering, alone, and terrifyingly unsure if she had secured a safe haven or merely locked herself into a tomb. The interior of Bunker 7 was absolute darkness and freezing cold. The thick steel door hissed shut, sealing Lola in a small, cramped space that smelled faintly of concrete and ozone. She leaned against the cold metal, gulping air, the rhythmic pounding in her chest the only sound. She fumbled for a light source. Her hands brushed against a cold metal panel near the door frame, and a small, harsh red light flickered on, revealing a compact, utilitarian room. It was clearly a temporary command post. A simple table, 2 folding chairs, and a secure comms console built into the wall. There were no windows, no visible exits. Lola's mind instantly cycled through the recent events, the ambush in the corridor, Kim Ji-hye's unexpected combat skill, and the desperate, lucky heave of the laundry sack. What happened to Kim Ji-hye? She moved immediately to the comms console. It was complex, labeled entirely in Korean characters. She recognized the Hangul for security and mainline, but hesitated. Using the wrong channel could alert the intruders that she was secure. Just then, the console emitted a sharp, buzzing tone. The main line was flashing an alert. Heart pounding, Lola risked hitting the receive button. John's voice exploded through the tiny speaker, raw with frantic desperation and adrenaline. Lola? Lola, are you safe? Report your location? John, I'm in a bunker. I think it's Bunker 7, near the laundry courtyard. I had to run. A woman named Kim Ji-hai sent me here. She engaged one of the hostiles. A wave of palpable RJONF swept over the speaker, quickly replaced by white-hot fury. Damn it, Appa! I told you not to move her! John's voice was strained, distorted by the fight. Stay there, Lola. Do not open that door for anyone. The outer defense is compromised. What about Kim Ji-hai? Lola asked, fear tightening her throat. A cold, grim voice cut across the channel. Min-jae's. She is stable, Miss Brooks. The operative is neutralized. She secured the corridor. She is a combat veteran of the old guard. You are her primary focus. And the Don? The Don is where he always is, Min-jae replied, a note of grim pride in his voice. In the center of the storm, he is securing the immediate perimeter of the command center. The comms line abruptly went silent, replaced by the crackle of static and the distant, muffled sound of continuous fighting outside. Lola was sealed off, connected only by a fragile wire to the war raging above her. She sat down on one of the folding chairs, forcing herself to breathe slowly, focusing on the small, dim red light. She realized that she had successfully used her knowledge of the mundane, the location of the courtyard, the heaviness of wet laundry, to survive the extraordinary. Another hour passed, feijoning like an eternity. The sounds of fighting slowly receded, replaced by the sounds of cleanup, shouting, the heavy drag of bodies, and the distant, mournful wail of a Seoul police siren, quickly silenced. Lola was debating whether to risk checking the comms again when a loud, rapid sequence of thumps hit the steel door, followed by a frantic, specific sequence of sharp knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock. It was a prearranged signal. John's security code. Lola launched herself at the door mechanism, her fingers fumbling with the sequence. She keyed in the code, and the heavy door hissed open. John stood there, covered in dust, his black suit torn at the shoulder, a thin line of blood tracing down his temple. But his eyes were clear and focused entirely on her. He stepped inside, kicking the heavy door shut behind him. He didn't speak. He simply crossed the small room in 2 strides and pulled her into a crushing embrace. This hug was different from the one in the alley. It wasn't frantic RJONF. It was bone-deep exhaustion and a silent, raw acknowledgement of how close they had come to final separation. His body trembled slightly beneath the ruined jacket. You disobeyed my order, he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. And if I hadn't, Kang Dae-jung's man would have breached the central command, and Kim Ji-hai would have been alone, Lola countered, pulling back just enough to look at his wound. You're bleeding. John dismissed the injury with a wave of his hand. Superficial. The north gate is secure. We repelled the immediate attack. They lost 5 men. We lost 1 guard, and 2 are wounded. The archives are safe. He sat down heavily on the chair, pulling Lola onto his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist like unbreakable steel bands. He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against her neck. When Min-jae said you were running, I thought I was going to lose my mind, he whispered, the Korean phrase for my heart woven into the rest of the sentence. Lola leaned into him, running her hands through his dust-caked hair, a sudden urgent desire to erase the trauma taking hold. I'm here, John. We survived. In the cold, tiny bunker, surrounded by the echoes of violence, they found a moment of profound intimacy. He tilted her face up, his eyes searching hers, recognizing the fierce strength and unwavering loyalty that was now her hallmark. He kissed her, slowly and dejohn-berately, pouring every ounce of his gratitude and renewed devotion into the contact. It was a reaffirmation of their bond, a shared vow that no amount of violence or distance could sever them. When they emerged from the bunker, an hour later, cleaned up and with a small patch over Jon's temple, the compound was humming with renewed purpose. The Dawn was back in the command center, the strategic maps now dominated by counterattack plans. Kim Ji-hai, her sleeve discreetly bandaged, was at his side. The Dawn looked at Lola, then at Jon, and gave a sharp, definitive nod, an unusual gesture of approval. Your partner's quick thinking secured our flank, Jon. The woman has a useful instinct for war. It was the highest compliment Lola could have received. Jon stepped forward, his eyes burning with resolve. Appa, we have the Serpent's American files. We know their distribution network. We need to hit King Daijung now, hard and fast, before he can mount another coordinated strike. The Dawn looked at the screen, which showed a tight cluster of targets: financial holdings, communications hubs, and known safe houses across Seoul. Agreed. We use the element of surprise. We hit them everywhere, simultaneously, starting tonight. But the ultimate target is Kang Dae-jung himself. He will be protected by his most Jante guard. Jon looked at his father, his expression grim. I am leading the team that hits his central command post. I will bring him to you. The air in the room chilled. This was not a raid. This was a political assassination attempt disguised as a tactical maneuver. Lola realized their time in Seoul would be short, brutal, and decisive. She walked over to the strategic map and pointed to a marked location near the Han River. If Kang Daijung is expecting a siege, she said, her Korean still rusty but her voice clear, he won't be at his central base. He'll be at his most secure location. Look for the one that looks like a civilian residence but has no satellite dishes and limited power lines. Jon looked at her, then at the map, then back to his father. The Dawn's gaze was fixed on Lola, a new depth of interest in his eyes. She has a point, Jon, the Dawn conceded. A true leader does not stay in the headquarters during a declared war. Find his hiding spot. The search began instantly, driven by Lola's outside perspective. The countdown to the final confrontation had begun. Lola's instinct, honed by survival and her outsider perspective, was immediately validated. Within 2 hours, using the specific parameters she provided, lack of modern communication signatures and a discreet, fortified architectural profile, the Han intelligence team located Kang Dae-jung's actual hiding spot, an isolated traditional villa tucked deep into the hills overlooking the Han River, an area historically inaccessible to modern surveillance. The Dawn surveyed the new intelligence, detailed blueprints of the villa now projected onto the massive screen, his face set in a mask of absolute concentration. He chose a place of history and quiet, the Dawn murmured. Bejonaving his protection would be silence. He looked at Jon. This is a surgical strike. No siege, no alarms. You have 1 hour to be inside and secure the target. Jon nodded, his hands already moving to strap on his reinforced tactical vest. He was now fully the soldier, his movements economical and lethal. Lola stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the satellite imagery of the villa's grounds. There's a natural blind spot, Jon, she pointed, tapping the screen. A cluster of ancient pine trees on the north perimeter. The thermal sensors won't see anyone moving beneath the canopy. It leads directly to the servants' quarters, which will be less reinforced. Jon looked at her, then at Minji, who was already adjusting the route based on her analysis. The efficiency of their collaboration was unnerving. Minji, Team 2 takes the north perimeter based on Lola's route, Jon ordered. He turned to Lola, his intensity softening for a split second. You stay in the command center, Lola. Track the perimeter. Guide them in. Your eyes are the best security we have. This time, Lola didn't argue. She knew her most valuable role was providing eyes from the sky, not a weapon on the ground. She was the strategist, the anchor. She pulled him close, her hands resting on the hard ceramic plates of his vest. "Be safe," she whispered in English. "Bring him back." Jon kissed her forehead, a swift, fierce promise. "Gwen Chana, I'll be back." The clock ticked down to midnight. Lola sat at the main communication console, her fingers resting lightly on the controls, the bulletproof vest a heavy, comforting weight beneath her shirt. Kim Ji-hai was beside her, monitoring the main defense grid. Jon's voice, calm and metallic, came through the encrypted comms. "Team 1 and 2 are in position. Minji, confirm perimeter integrity." "Perimeter intact, boss. Proceeding to the north wall, low and slow, under the pines." Lola watched the thermal imagery display. The heat signatures of Jon and his men moved like ghosts, perfectly camouflaged by the ancient trees, just as she predicted. The tension in the room was excruciating. Then, the action began. A silent breach of the wall, a flicker of movement inside the servants' quarters. "We're in. Internal resistance encountered. Minimal. Proceeding to the main residence." Jon's voice was strained, the sound of the confrontation muffled by the tactical silence of the assault. Lola tracked the thermal signatures, Jon's group moving swiftly through the house toward the central courtyard where Kang Dae-jung was expected to be. She saw the Serpent's guards converge, realizing the infiltration too late. The fighting was brief, brutal, and utterly silent over the comms. Only heavy breathing, occasional static, and the sudden chilling sound of Minji confirming a neutralization. Then, the central target. Jon's heat signature merging with another larger signature in a secure central room. The battle was happening now. Suddenly, a muffled, sharp yell, not of pain, but of rage, followed by the sound of a heavy body hitting the floor. The comms went dead silent, utterly, terribly silent. The entire command center held its breath. Lola stared at the screen, her gaze fixed on the two merged thermal signatures. She reached out, her hand hovering over the emergency open channel button, fear clawing at her throat. Seconds dragged into an eternity. Finally, Jon's voice returned, strained but firm. "Mission complete. Target secured. Proceeding to extraction. Everyone is alive." A massive communal exhale swept the command center. The Dawn, who had not moved during the entire operation, gave a slow, deep nod of satisfaction. The sun was rising as the motorcade returned to the Han compound. Kang Dae-jung, a middle-aged man looking ruined and utterly defeated, was dragged from one of the SUVs, his Jante protection dismantled. He was dejanvered to the Dawn in the command center, where the final, unspoken reckoning took place behind closed doors. Jon was exhausted, but whole. He walked immediately past the command center, his eyes searching until they found Lola. He didn't speak the language of war anymore. He only spoke the language of devotion. He led her back to their quiet suite overlooking the garden. The sunlight streamed through the windows, chasing away the shadows of the night. He pulled her into the room and locked the door behind them. "It's over," he said simply, his voice rough. "Kang Dae-jung is no longer a threat. The war is won." Lola's body sagged with the Arjonev she had held inside for months. She pulled off the heavy, uncomfortable vest, tossing it onto the sofa. "And Jinho? He has been dealt with," Jon confirmed, his tone leaving no doubt as to the severity of the outcome, but sparing her the details. "He will never betray anyone again." He looked at Lola, tracing the curve of her jaw with a thumb. His eyes filled with a tenderness that contradicted the lethal precision he had shown all night. You saved us, Lola. You saved me. You saved the mission in the alley, and you won us this war by finding his hiding place. We did it together, she corrected, resting her hands on his chest, Fijoning the steady, strong beat of his heart. Jon pulled her into a long, profound kiss, a celebration of their survival and a promise of their future. Days turned into weeks. The Han compound shifted from a fortress to a home. The Don, satisfied with his victory, began the complex process of rebuilding and consolidating power, with Jon at his side. One afternoon, they were back in their secluded garden, practicing Korean. Lola could now hold simple conversations, thanks to Jon's persistent tutoring. Now the hardest one, Jon said, turning to her, his usual playful spark replaced by a deep seriousness. I know Saranghae, Lola teased. It's a different kind of challenge, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside, nestled on the white silk, was a simple, stunning ring, a diamond encircled by a John Kate motif of flowering Korean plum blossoms. Lola Brooks, Jon began, his voice thick with emotion, his formality returning only to make his declaration that much more earnest. You walked into the most dangerous part of my world and never flinched. You are my anchor, my strength, and the only light in this darkness. I want you to be my wife. I want you to be mine, forever. He switched to Korean, the words deeply familiar from their lessons. Nawa gyolen heijule. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down Lola's face, the contrast between the war they had survived and the beautiful peace they had found overwhelming. Yes, Jon, she whispered, pulling him up and kissing him fiercely. Ne salang ye, my love, yes. The war was over. The life of a student was over. Their future, complicated, dangerous, and utterly devoted, had just begun. Stay with us for the next episode of Lola and Jon's complicated, dangerous, and utterly devoted love story, Us Against the World,